"She's not worth it, Hale. Leave her." The comms crackled with static, the voice on the other end indifferent, almost mechanical. Lieutenant Jacob Hale stared at the grotesque figure lying motionless in the dust before him. The alien woman, Zira, looked more like a corpse than a princess. Her skin, a dull greyish blue, was mottled with scars, and her thin, angular face was framed by strands of wiry silver hair. She had been abandoned, left to rot on this barren wasteland of a planet. Around her, the wind howled, throwing sand over her limp form as if nature itself sought to erase her existence. "Not worth it," Hale muttered under his breath. He knelt beside her, his gloved hand hovering over her throat, searching for any sign of life. The faintest pulse met his fingertips, barely alive, but alive nonetheless. "Lieutenant, you are wasting critical resources," the voice on the comm repeated. It belonged to Captain Morrow, who sat safely aboard the Elysian Dawn, the fleet's medical flagship orbiting the desolate planet. "She's an alien, and one her own people deemed expendable. You know the orders." Hale clenched his jaw. Orders. He'd followed plenty of those in his time, and it had cost him everything. The memory of his wife, her blood-soaked hands clutching at his, begging him to save her, flashed before his eyes. Orders had failed him then. Orders could be damned now. "I'm bringing her in," he said curtly, switching off the comms before Morrow could respond. With a grunt, he hoisted Zira's frail body into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her frame as light as a child's, and her alien physiology made her joints feel strange beneath his grip. Her head lolled against his chest, and for a brief moment her eyes fluttered open, icy silver irises locking onto his. "Why?" she rasped, the single word barely audible over the desert wind. Hale didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. Not yet. He carried her across the dunes to his battered shuttle, the sandstorm stinging his exposed skin. Every step felt heavier, not from her weight, but from the knowledge that this decision would cost him more than he could afford. The fleet wouldn't forgive disobedience, not for an alien, not for her. Inside the shuttle, the dim lights flickered as the engines sputtered to life. Hale secured Zira on a medical stretcher, his hands moving on autopilot as he hooked her up to basic life support systems. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling in uneven bursts. He grabbed a scanner from the medkit, frowning at the readings. Internal bleeding, dehydration, and a failing immune system. She didn't have much time. "Stay with me," he murmured almost to himself. Zira's eyes fluttered open again, fixing him with a look that was equal parts defiance and despair. "You don't have to," she whispered, her voice brittle like cracked glass. "Yeah, well, I'm not great at following rules," Hale replied, his tone gruff. He injected her with a stabilizing serum, watching as her breathing steadied slightly. "Besides, I've got a bad habit of saving things that everyone else gives up on." Zira's lips twitched, almost forming a smile, but it faded as quickly as it came. Her eyes closed once more, and Hale sat back in the pilot's seat, exhaling deeply. He glanced out the shuttle's cracked viewport, the vast desert stretching endlessly under a sky streaked with orange and violet. Somewhere beyond those dunes, a battle had raged, leaving her as its forgotten casualty. The shuttle shuddered as it lifted off, the engines straining against the storm. Hale set a course for the Elysian Dawn, knowing full well what awaited him there. He was disobeying a direct order. The fleet wouldn't welcome him back with open arms, especially not with an alien aboard, an alien princess no less, whose disfigured form was a stark reminder of everything her people despised. As the shuttle ascended through the atmosphere, Hale couldn't shake the feeling that saving her was only the beginning. The galaxy had a way of punishing those who broke its unspoken rules, and Zira was living proof of that. But maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fighting for in those broken rules. and maybe, just maybe, he could still make things right. The shuttle docked with a jarring thud, and the Elysian Dawn's airlock hissed open, revealing a sterile corridor bathed in harsh white light. Hale carried Zira in his arms, her frail body barely shifting with his movements. Her breathing was still shallow, but the serum had bought her a little more time. As he stepped into the corridor, the muffled sound of boots echoed toward him. "Lieutenant Hale." Captain Morrow's voice was cold, cutting through the tense silence like a blade. She stood at the end of the hallway, flanked by 2 armed guards, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. "I ordered you to leave her." "She's alive," Hale replied flatly, not slowing his pace. "And she needs medical attention." "She's not our concern," Morrow snapped. "You disobeyed a direct order. That alien is a liability, and you've jeopardized this mission by bringing her here." Hale stopped in front of her, his jaw clenched. "She's not a liability. She's a person. And last I checked, we're medics. We save lives." Morrow's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Zira stirred in Hale's arms. Her silver eyes flickered open, and a weak, pained voice escaped her lips. "Your people hate mine. Why, save me." Hale glanced down at her, his grip tightening slightly. "Because someone has to." Morrow let out a sharp breath, stepping closer. "Listen carefully, Lieutenant. You've already broken protocol. If you insist on keeping her here, it's your head on the line, not mine. Don't expect the Council to show mercy when they find out about this." "Noted," Hale said curtly, brushing past her and the guards. Morrow's glare burned into his back, but she didn't stop him. The medical bay was quiet, its rows of empty beds a stark reminder of how few had made it back from the surface alive. Hale gently placed Zira on one of the cots, his hands moving quickly to connect her to the ship's advanced diagnostic systems. The screen lit up with a flurry of data, most of it grim. Multiple organ failures, severe malnutrition, and traces of a substance he didn't recognize coursing through her bloodstream. "Why did they leave you?" Hale asked softly, more to himself than to her. Zira's eyes fluttered open again, her gaze distant. "I failed them," she whispered. "Not strong enough, not perfect." Hale frowned. "Perfect? What does that even mean?" She didn't answer, her eyes closing once more as exhaustion overtook her. Hale stared at the monitor, his mind racing. The substance in her blood, it wasn't natural. It was synthetic, alien in origin, and its presence seemed to be the cause of her deteriorating condition. He ran a deeper scan, his brow furrowing as the results came in. It wasn't just a poison, it was something far more insidious. "Lieutenant," a voice interrupted, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see Dr. Lannick, one of the ship's senior medics, standing in the doorway. "You've stirred up quite the storm with this one. The crew's already talking." "Let them talk," Hale muttered, turning back to the monitor. "She's not going anywhere." Lannick stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You're risking a court-martial for an alien we know nothing about. Why?" Hale didn't look up. "Because it's the right thing to do." Lannick studied him for a moment before sighing. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But if you're going to save her, you'll need more than guts. The system flagged something in her scans, a genetic marker we've never seen before. I'm running an analysis now, but—" He hesitated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Whatever she is, she's not just any alien, and I think the Council knows it." Hale's grip tightened on the edge of the cot. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they didn't abandon her because she failed," Lannick said grimly. "They abandoned her because they're afraid of her." The words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Hale felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just about saving a life. It was about uncovering a truth that someone didn't want them to find. And if Lannick was right, that truth could cost them everything. The hum of the medical bay's machinery filled the silence as Hale stared at the monitor, its glowing display outlining the strange genetic marker in Zira's bloodstream. It pulsed faintly, almost like it was alive, reacting to the scans in a way he had never seen before. Dr. Lanik stood beside him, his expression grim, but it was clear curiosity was beginning to override his caution. "This marker," Lanik said, pointing to the screen, "it's not just unique, it's reactive. It's like it's tied to some sort of external network, something bigger." Hale crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "You're saying her DNA is connected to something outside of her body?" "Not just connected," Lanik said, lowering his voice. "Controlled, or maybe controlling." Before Hale could respond, a faint sound drew his attention. Zira stirred on the cot, her breathing shallow but her eyes fluttering open. Her silver irises reflected the soft light of the bay, and she looked between Hale and Lanik with weary suspicion. "What are you doing?" she rasped, her voice barely audible. "Trying to save your life," Hale replied, stepping closer, "and figure out why your people abandoned you." Zira's expression hardened, and she turned her head away. "Because I don't belong. I'm a defect." Hale crouched beside her, his voice firm but not unkind. "They don't abandon someone just because they don't fit in. Not like this. Whatever they did to you, whatever they put in you, it's more than that, isn't it?" Her silence was answer enough. "Zira," Lanik said carefully, "this marker in your blood, it's not natural. It's tied to something much larger, and I think you know what it is." Her head snapped toward him, her eyes narrowing. "You think you understand?" she hissed, her voice suddenly sharp. "You think you can fix what they broke? You don't know what they're capable of." "Then tell us," Hale pressed. "Help us understand." Zira's gaze flickered between the two men, and for a moment it seemed like she would stay silent. But then she exhaled a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her secrets was too much to bear. "They call it the Nexus," she said, her voice trembling. "An ancient technology buried deep within our people's history. The marker in my blood. It's a key, a connection. They infused me with it when I was a child, hoping I would be the one to unlock it." "Unlock what?" Hale asked. She looked at him, her silver eyes filled with a mix of fear and anger. "A weapon or a power. They don't even know. All they know is that it's dangerous. And when I failed to meet their expectations, when I didn't become what they wanted, they decided I was safer discarded." The room fell silent, the gravity of her words sinking in. Hale stood, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process what she was saying. "They abandoned you," he said slowly, "because they were afraid you'd succeed." Zira nodded faintly. "And now, they'll do anything to make sure I don't." As if on cue, the medical bay doors hissed open, and a young ensign burst in, her face pale and panicked. "Lieutenant Hale," she said, her voice trembling, "we've got incoming." Hale turned sharply. "What kind of incoming?" The ensign hesitated, glancing at Zira. "It's a royal fleet, sir. They're demanding we hand over the alien, or they'll open fire." Lanik cursed under his breath, but Hale's expression hardened. He turned back to Zira, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing outside. "They're here for you," he said, "but they're not taking you, not without a fight." Zira stared at him, her disbelief evident. "You'd risk your life for me? For something you don't even understand?" Hale leaned closer, his voice low but resolute. "I don't care what they think you are. To me, you're just someone who deserves a chance to live. That's enough." For the first time, a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes. But outside, the tension was mounting. The ship's alarms blared, and the distant rumble of approaching engines echoed through the hull. "Lanik," Hale barked, "get her stable and ready to move. If they want her, they'll have to come through me." And as the Elysian dawn prepared for what could be its final stand, Zira realized that this human, the one person who had no reason to help her, might be her only chance at survival. Part 2 of this story coming soon.